Hello, everybody, and welcome to Penguins to Go, your daily dose of Pittsburgh Penguins news and analysis. You can find us on YouTube at Inside the Penguins or anywhere you get your podcasts from. The Pittsburgh Penguins, as we all know, are on the hunt for a sixth Stanley Cup, the fourth in the Sidney Crosby, Evgeny Malkin, and Chris Letang era. While the team, I will say, is in better shape now than they were before Kyle Dubas took over in June, they're still going to need dark horses to emerge. They're still going to need unsung heroes to emerge for the team. One of those players may not make the team out of camp. And honestly, let me amend that. One of those players will not make the team out of camp, but could become an integral piece down the line this season. And that's Sam Poulin. Sam Poulin is entering a very pivotal season in his development. It's not the end-all be-all because let's remember we're talking about somebody who is still 22 years old. But this could be a very important year for Sam Poulin's career. He was initially drafted by the Pittsburgh Penguins in the first round of the 2019 NHL draft. Made his professional debut a few seasons later with the Wilkes-Barre Penguins during the 2021-22 season. And that season was interesting for him because he struggled out of the gate. It's his first taste of professional hockey. Before then, he had just played in the Q. His first taste of professional hockey, and it knocked him down a little bit. He struggled to get his feet underneath him. He struggled to really hit the strides that were expected of him by the Wilkes-Barre coaching staff. And eventually, about halfway through that season, he was sat down. Healthy scratch. Sent up to the press box for a few games. Last offseason, I should say, I spoke to Nick Hart, the play-by-play voice of the Wilkes-Barre Penguins, specifically to talk and ask about Sam Poulin and the way that his season had went, his first professional season. And he told me, he said, Nick, the difference between Sam Poulin before the healthy scratches and Sam Poulin after the healthy scratches was night and day. And that's the result that you want to hear if you're that coaching staff, if you're somebody that is hoping for a lot from Sam Poulin. That's the response you want. You want that to have a positive impact on the player because there are instances when that happens and it has a negative impact on the player. It hurts their confidence. It hurts the way that they look at themselves as a player and they just aren't able to get back and aren't able to bounce back. Poulin went the opposite direction, and thankfully so. Poulin bounced back really well in the second half of that season. He ended up taking on a larger role for the AHL Penguins, and he transitioned to center, which is an important piece to the puzzle of his development. As we know, Mike Sullivan loves, and when I say loves, I mean absolutely adores players that are versatile, players that he can plug and play up and down the lineup, left to right. He can play the wing. He can play center. That means he has a leg up on anybody who doesn't. It's an important piece to the puzzle, particularly when looking at this season as somebody who might want to try to break in to the Pittsburgh Penguins' bottom six. So that was his first professional season, which brings us to last season. He makes his NHL debut early in the year against the Calgary Flames. Did he look like a world beater? No, he didn't look like a world beater. He didn't have the Jake Gensel NHL debut. But he certainly didn't look out of place. Let's not forget the 3 games that he played in the NHL last season were 3 of the worst games, or at least during the worst stretch for the entire team. So among a team that was struggling and wasn't playing their best, Sam Poulin looked pretty good. He looked okay at the NHL level. Then he gets sent back down, and then, of course, as we all know, he leaves the organization for a few months to take care of himself and his mental health. Something that prospects, especially at this young of an age, if you need to do it, you should do it. Right? Because the burden of being a top pick for an NHL organization, particularly one that doesn't have a lot of high-profile prospects, is something that I can't imagine, but I would assume is pretty heavy, right? The only people in the organization right now that you could ask about that is Poulin and more recently Owen Pickering and Braden Yeager. So he takes a few months off, comes back to the organization late in the year, gets a couple games under his belt before the end of the season, which brings us to this season. His third season as a professional hockey player. Where does he begin and how quickly does he get back to where he was? Because when he was away from the team, he wasn't skating. So there's going to be a process building back up to where he was in his progression through his development. We saw that he was at Penguins development camp in July, getting some reps with the rest of the prospects, getting back under the umbrella of the Pittsburgh Penguins and having them work on his development there. He's going to be part of Penguins training camp this September. And like I said earlier, it's important to remember he's only 22 years old. So this year isn't the end-all be-all, but it's going to be pivotal considering how well he's able to bounce back and where he's able to put himself in his progression. I think that by the end of this season, I mentioned earlier, he's not going to make the team out of the camp. He's not. I mean, that would be a Herculean effort because there are so many people in front of him, and he still needs to get his feet back underneath him. The Penguins haven't seen him play really professionally other than those 2 games, and that's a very small sample size. They haven't seen him play professionally really since last November, December. So it's going to take a minute for him to get back to where he was. But by maybe mid-season, I think Poulin could end up being a needed insertion of youth for the Penguins' bottom 6. When it comes to his game on the ice, when clicking on full cylinders, he is fantastic at protecting the puck in the offensive zone. It's very difficult to get the puck off of him. And while, yes, his skating is not a strong suit, his ability to just absolutely hound the puck carrier in the defensive zone and stick with it in the defensive zone and then transverse that into the offensive zone, and his ability to handle the puck, like we mentioned, his vision, his passing ability, his playmaking ability, if it all comes together, Sam Poulin could be a very important piece, a very important addition to the Pittsburgh Penguins at that point in time during the season. Obviously, you don't know how things are going to work out in the first half of the season. There may be injuries that call upon maybe an Alex Nylander, maybe an Andreas Johnsson, maybe a Valtteri Puustinen, and they might take that position, they might take that spot, that role, and they might just run with it. And if that happens, that's good for the Pittsburgh Penguins. But by the midpoint of the season, Sam Poulin is somebody that has that pedigree, that has that experience, that if he can bounce back and get his feet back underneath him, he has that much progression in his development cycle that he could end up being an everyday NHLer by the end of this season. I feel like I've said this before, but when you look at the story from 2 years ago to last year to this year, it feels like the arc of the story is getting close to where it needs to be, depending on how he looks in training camp, depending on how he looks in the first few months of the season. But he has that offensive potential. He scored 16 goals in his first season in Wilkes-Barre, 37 points. He has the puck possession ability that Mike Sullivan likes, and let's face it, the Pittsburgh Penguins, they are a cycling team. They're not a team that beats you off the rush very much. They like to get into the zone, continue to hold possession of the puck, and create opportunities by elongated zone time. Sam Poulin is going to fit that mold. So he could be a very good fit for the Pittsburgh Penguins bottom 6 at some point in this season. If he can put it together in the first half of the season, man, that would help out the bottom 6. Whether that's at center or wing. Because if it's at center and he's good enough to bounce Lars Eller out of that third-line center role, then you're very good, right? Because you can push Lars Eller to the fourth line, Acciari over to the wing. If it's a winger, I think there's more opportunity at winger. I think there's less depth when it comes to bottom 6 winger for the Pittsburgh Penguins. That would be important too. The Penguins need third-line talent. More importantly, they need third-line offense. And if Sam Poulin is able to get to the point where he's ready for the NHL this season, that is a very integral role in which the Penguins won't have to outsource midway through the season. Being able to absolutely bring people up from the minors is going to be an important piece to the puzzle this year for the Pittsburgh Penguins. They haven't done it the last 2 seasons. They have some talent down there. If they're able to bring them along, get their progression in the right sense, and then bring them up to the NHL when they fit and at the right time, that could be a massive piece for the Pittsburgh Penguins in getting back to the playoffs and hopefully being a team that can contend for a Stanley Cup. That's going to do it for this episode of Penguins to Go. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Remember, you can find us on YouTube at Inside the Penguins or anywhere you get your podcast from. We'll see you next time.